Hawaii is made up of many people from all different countries, and today we have two immigration attorneys, two of the top immigration attorneys in our state, to talk about what are some of the issues for people who are coming to Hawaii, whether it's to visit or to live here, and in fact, in some cases, to get political asylum. I want to introduce Melissa Vincenty and Clare Hanusz. And they are partners in a law firm, and they take on some of the toughest cases and help some of the most downtrodden people in our state. So I wanted to today spend a little time acknowledging the good work they do in the community, and also talk about some of the high-profile cases that you've been involved with, because you have been on the news many times in recent months, I'd say, for various reasons, various and sundry reasons, right?
Thanks for having us, Malia.
Sure.
Thanks. I feel a little vindicated since the Hawaii or Honolulu magazine and their top lawyers.
Did they pick you?
Right. No, we never get listed.
Oh, well.
Okay.
We don't have the PR machine behind us, I guess.
You didn't pay $10,000?
No,
sorry.
We're not corporate enough. So thanks for calling us.
Thank you.
You're on the top one, in News Behind the News. How's that? Okay, so tell me, how did you two get involved in this partnership, and what was your calling to become an immigration attorney? Because a lot of people don't grow up saying someday I want to be an immigration attorney and take on all those challenges. What happened to bring you two together and to get you in this place that you're at now?
I think Claire probably, in diapers, said I want to be an immigration attorney.
Well, I thought early on that I might want to be an attorney, but it was when I was in Arizona prior to moving to Hawaii. So in the early 1990s, I was working for a small nonprofit that worked with Central American refugees. And I met a lot of attorneys doing really amazing work with these people, and really life-changing and life-saving work. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, and I saw what they were doing, and I thought, that's what I want to do, not realizing at the time how stressful and kind of high burnout the profession can be. But I moved to Hawaii and went to law school with the goal of becoming an immigration attorney. And and that's my story.
So that's where, now what about you, Melissa?
Well, I think my path to law came a little bit later in life, although I recall as a youngster saying that I was going to be an attorney, but my image was, of course, in the courtroom and pounding the table, and I thought that was really cool. But I came to it in a roundabout way in the end. I had been involved in human rights issues for many years and in Tibetan issues, and there came a point that I needed a credential, and so law school was the best credential I thought I could get. Coming to immigration law, I'd always been interested, obviously, in refugee issues and human rights issues. And naturally, immigration intersects with those things, international law, family law. So I found it a really satisfying area to get into. And Claire and I met on the first day of law school at William S. Richardson School of Law.
In 1996.
That's right.
Summer of 1996.
We became instant friends.
Oh, so now that's history, and that's how you became law. When did you become law partners?
Well, we're not officially partners,
right?
in any legal.
Yeah, we don't have
partnership.
A legal partnership.
We each have our own. Our own practice, but we share a space, and we're co-counsel on about 100 cases involving Thai farm workers here in the islands and on the mainland, and also in Thailand. So we do a lot of collaborative work together.
Now, maybe you can talk about what are some of the big immigration issues, because I definitely want to get into the Thai issue, the Thai worker issue, but what are some of the big cases that you've had in Hawaii in terms of, interesting cases or cases in the news, and what kinds of cases generally do you find that you're encountering?
I think Claire does a bit more of the litigation side and removal cases than I, although I'm doing a lot more of that nowadays just out of necessity, because a lot of our clients are now being arrested and put in deportation proceedings. I've worked on asylum claims. I kind of go across the board. I work in family immigration, business immigration, human rights work. And I think Claire can speak. She does a lot more deportation, so she's in court a lot more. And it's a lot more stressful, I think, in many ways, a lot of the cases that she has. We've co-counseled on some of those cases as well. So that's kind of how and that's why we make a good partnership sometimes, because we don't always have the same types of cases. So it's interesting. So
where are these people coming from that are getting deported in the first place? I mean, how did they get here? How do you find that people are coming to Hawaii?
Well, there are two groups of people generally in removal proceedings. As Melissa said, a lot of my work is in immigration court, trying to defend people against removal or deportation, as it's called. And there are basically two groups. There's people who have permanent residency who've done something or allegedly done something to violate that status, and the government is seeking to remove them to their home country. And in some cases, some of those cases that I've been involved with have involved people who've been in the United States a really long time and came legally as refugees or as permanent residents. Family members petitioned for them from the Philippines, and they just got off track at some point along the way, and they've been here for 20 or 30 years and had one misstep with the law, made one oftentimes just a really bad choice, and because they never applied for naturalization and got their citizenship, they are still vulnerable to removal. And there's, depending on the situation, there's different things that you can argue in cases so that some people can stay. And then the second group of cases are people who've either entered the country unlawfully or without documents, or people who've come on visas and overstayed. And a lot of my clients have come to the United States illegally crossed the border, almost in every case for economic reasons.
From Mexico? Or?
I have a lot of clients from Mexico, a lot from Central America. I was in immigration court this morning with a couple from Guatemala who had both left during the Civil War in the early 90s, and now have U.S. citizen children and no criminal record in either case, but because of the way they entered, and they were discovered by Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE when ICE was looking for someone else. ICE knocked on their door and discovered them and put them in removal proceedings.
So are you seeing an increase in people getting deported, or?
I think ICE has really stepped up its enforcement efforts over the years, over the recent years, which is ironic because, and very disappointing, because when President Obama was campaigning and then after he was elected, he said that immigration reform, what he called comprehensive immigration reform, which was going to be one of his top priorities, and that within the first year of his administration there would be sweeping changes. Everybody pretty much agrees that the immigration system is broken. And of course, we live in a really unique situation in the United States because we have the longest, really, first world, third world border in the world. So you're going to have a lot of push factors driving people from Mexico, Guatemala, Central America, and other countries into the United States for economic necessity. And you know, I had a nice little chat with one of the ICE attorneys during a break we had this morning in court, and she said that, you know, she said that she completely understands why a lot of these people made the choices that they had. They broke a civil law, the nation's immigration law, and that if she was in the same situation as a lot of them, she might have made those very same choices. And I think it's that level of empathy that is often lacking when people just take a look at a group and brandish them as being kind of illegals and not looking beyond what were the factors that pushed them out of their country in the first place. And if that had been me, what choices might I have made? And I'm getting a little off topic, but those are often the kinds of cases that pop up in an immigration court. And there are master calendar hearings on Monday and Wednesday in immigration court. The immigration court is open, so I encourage people who are curious about it to go down and look, because it's really a fascinating cross-section of humanity, and often very depressing. You see a lot of families getting separated, and I think what Melissa and I are really trying to do, one of our missions is to keep families together, because we see that when Daddy gets deported, the families, the wives and the children, and that's unfortunately kind of the most typical scenario is Daddy gets deported, U.S. citizen wife and children. The families really fall into crisis, and it makes a lot more sense for people to stay together as a family. So we're trying to. That's a lot of the work that we do.
I'd like to add that Claire won that case this morning, the Guatemalan case.
Oh, okay.
Against a lot of odds. Claire was a wonderful advocate for her clients. Won that case.
Thank you. There are occasional victories.
Oh, yeah. So Melissa, what about you? How How did you, what are some of the highlights of your casework?
Highlights of my casework. Well, it's always satisfying, and I would reiterate what Claire's already said about keeping families together. I've had situations where I was able to turn a bad situation into a good situation. And a lot of times when you're working through a case, something will pop up that you will never imagine can pop up. I've had situations where family thought that they had gotten through a divorce and got remarried, and that wasn't the case. The divorce hadn't gone through, and so they weren't legally married, and had to clean that up in family court first and go back into immigration court. And so that, I would say, just overall, when I can see a family that hasn't been broken up is the biggest satisfaction that I can get out of my work. So.
Now, I want to talk about some really big, high-profile cases that you've been involved with. There's an issue, a big issue here in Hawaii, and it's very controversial. There's people passionate on both sides about human trafficking. And some people in law enforcement or defense attorneys will say, that's not happening here, or, the people are exaggerating about human trafficking. And on the other side, you have the people, including yourselves and other people who have said, look, we have these people, especially the most recent case from the workers from Thailand. There's actually 2 cases going on where they actually have been trafficked. And you kind of define trafficking in a way that, the defense lawyers argue is stretching it, but you have been able to show how it's impacted people from, for example, Thailand. So maybe you could talk a little bit let's talk about the Loon Farms case. Mm-hmm. One of the issues was there was 44 men, and tell me if I'm incorrect, but 44 men from Thailand that were brought over in 2004, right? September 2004, and to work for Loon Farms. The Sioux brothers went there, or at least Alec went there to meet with the recruiters. Right. And he brought the men over, and the men that I've interviewed, some of your clients, have said things like, well, we thought we were going to live in much better conditions. We expected to be fed 3 times a day. That was part of our agreement. We were going to be paid a certain amount of hours, for a certain amount of hours, and a certain amount per hour that we weren't paid. And we were going to be here, they thought, 3 years. Right. And when they actually were only working on the farm about 5 months, from what I understand, is it right? About 5 months?
That's correct.
And so what happens is the big issue is not just that you work 5 months and you lose your job. The big issue is you paid a big fee up front to come to Hawaii. And, if somebody makes 60 cents an hour or even less in Thailand, paying back this kind of fee that they had to borrow up front, $20,000 in some cases, right? As much as $20,000, right. Mm-hmm. That they used their farms and their homes and such to put on as collateral, borrowed from loan sharks in the community. And then they go to Hawaii thinking that they can make back the money in a year and then spend 2 more years making a life for their family. For their entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins,
Good
and so
summary.
on.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with this case, which ended up criminally being dismissed? We saw it was like a train wreck watching the U.S. attorneys try this case because one of them fell ill, and before she fell ill, she made several mistakes and stumbled and so on. And the Sioux brothers' defense attorneys were very sharp and got the case dismissed. We're not sure why. We still are not sure why, but it was probably something to do with what was said in the grand jury by one of the U.S. attorneys that may have been part of it. That got the case dismissed. So now people think the Sioux brothers didn't do anything wrong. Did they do anything wrong, in your opinion? And what's your situation with some of the clients you're representing?
How much time do we have again?
Yeah, 13 minutes.
13 minutes. Oh, okay.
And you have to save some time for the other cases.
There's obviously certain things that Claire and I can't discuss because there's pending civil litigation that we're working on. Okay. And so, in terms of the details of the case, I think your summary was completely accurate to what's already out in the public, and I can comment on what's already been exposed in the public in the media. I think the first thing that I would comment on is the case was never tried. So there was no chance to hear from the victims. There was no chance to bring out other evidence that Claire and I knew existed because we had sat through hundreds of hours of interviews. And so we knew what these men had been saying. And the second thing that I'd like to clear up is Claire and I had nothing to do with forcing these men to come forward or offering them green cards or enticing them in any way to participate in the prosecution of this case. I mean, this was definitely run by the Department of Justice and the FBI. Claire and I were assisting only in the sense that our clients were represented by attorneys. And so when they would be called in for an interview, we would be present, as anyone would be would ask their attorney to be present. We were there to make sure that nothing in terms of the investigation crossed a line that was inappropriate for our clients, and that's how we participated in the investigation. So we weren't driving the investigation. The clients came to us through a social worker in the local community who had thought she had identified possible trafficking victims, and as her job and her training has shown her, as she did the right thing. She contacted Clare, who had worked on some trafficking cases with that particular agency, and said, can you guys come take a look at this, because I think these might be trafficking victims. And that's exactly how these cases started. We didn't go out trolling for clients. Actually, we didn't know anything that these clients were out there. And that was 3 years ago, almost to the day. Where
you're bringing this up because the defense attorney for the Sue brothers accused you
of coaching the witness, coaching the victims to basically create a story to make green cards, which is
absolutely ridiculous. And I take really big offense to that, because I know what these men went through to come forward, how scared they were. They had a lot to lose, they felt. Some of them had been deported. They had a lot working against them, and the fact that they did come forward and wanted to tell their story says a lot about the integrity of the men, and doesn't say anything about the integrity of the defense attorneys.
Right. And as Melissa said, the Sue brothers didn't win the case. The case was dismissed based on procedural and technical errors. The case was never tried, and it was really difficult to explain to the victims, who had been waiting and very willing and eager to testify, and trying to explain to them why they weren't going to have the opportunity to tell their stories.
Because none of them got to go up to the stand.
None of them got to testify. Right. They only got through the one FBI agent who had recently taken the lead in the case, and the co-conspirator. The co-conspirator, who was a kind of middleman who is Thai but lived in LA and served as kind of a labor broker working with, hired by and working with the Sues. So that was really difficult. And the Department of Justice has met with the victims, and they explained to the victims that what happened with the case was not because they were not believed, was not because anything had changed with the credibility of the victims or their stories, but that, and it's true, I mean, if in a trial, it's not really a crapshoot, but things can go wrong that you never would have expected. And so there's even I think for the cleanest case, there can be issues that can really derail a very good and very solid case. And I think that's exactly what happened in the criminal trial. And just thank goodness there's a civil remedy out there for the guys that we're pursuing. And they're all, 3 years later after coming forward, most of them are in a much better place now. They're not afraid anymore. Melissa and I, in meeting with them, we can, the weight that's been lifted off of their shoulders that they were carrying around with them when they were scared. They were basically, trying to fly under the radar. Their status had expired. The Sue brothers had not offered to pay their tickets home, which was required under the terms of the visa that they were brought under.
So they're basically stuck in Hawaii homeless at the end of this whole thing, without any money and without a job and without the proper paperwork to continue working.
And with tremendous debt. Mm-hmm. Without they could have, if it wasn't for the debt, they would have all gone home and just kind of, called it, a bad experience. They maybe didn't make any profit, but maybe didn't lose that much. But because of the debt, they couldn't go home. They could never earn enough in Thailand to pay off the debt. That they had to stay in the United States to continue working because the wages in Thailand just simply weren't high enough. Mm-hmm. So, as disappointing as the kind of implosion of the criminal case against Alun Farms was, most of the victims are in a much better place right now, emotionally, financially, psychologically, and that's.
But they still do have this debt. A lot of them still do.
Some of them do. Some of them have paid it off, and some do still have a tremendous amount of debt. Mm-hmm. That's true. And it will be very interesting to see. Well, it's interesting. The case isn't quite over.
Right.
We thought it was over, and the criminal case, and then the attorneys for the Sue brothers filed a motion to try to recoup all of their attorneys' fees, alleging that the government prosecution was frivolous and malicious. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. That's back before Federal Judge Puglisi, thank you, in Federal District Court on November 3rd. And the defense is fighting hard to further kind of vindicate themselves, I guess, and the government's fighting back too and saying, you're absolutely wrong. We had grounds for all of the charges that were levied against you, and so we'll see how it comes out in the wash. And then the Global Horizons case, which was the other Thai trafficking case that you talked about, is scheduled for trial still in February of 2012. That's a case that involves probably between 800 and 1,100 Thai workers over a period of probably about 3 years, and many of them touched farms in Hawaii. So there is.
So that was a different situation in that Loon went and got their own workers.
Right.
Global is more of it's a manpower company, and it distributed the workers throughout Hawaii and the mainland.
And that,
Exactly.
we go back in time a little bit. Loon Farms had contracted Global Horizons and got workers from them initially back in 2003.
Right.
And so understood how that business model was being run, decided they could do it themselves. And so when you're talking about recruitment fees, that came up quite often in terms of what did they know about recruitment fees? Were they legal? Were they not legal? They absolutely knew that this practice was happening in Thailand and did not instruct their recruiters to stop that practice and allow that to continue happening. For what reason? I don't know what their motivation is, but one of the things that happened is because they had these debts, as soon as they arrived in Hawaii, they could be under their control and basically tell them you either can work or you can just go back to Thailand. It's okay, just go back to Thailand, knowing what that would mean for these men. So, it goes back in time in terms of what they knew and what they didn't know. They understood that this was what was happening, but yet when they hired an agent to do the hiring for them, they did not do anything to stop these high recruitment fees and actually knew about them. So, the global case is much more larger in scale. It was, it's a very large company. It's nationwide. The men moved around a lot more, obviously moved to different farms when there was work, when there wasn't work, and was under the basic control of the company. So it became their asset that they could just move when a farm needed a little bit of workers for a week or two, they'd move them all the way across the country and back.
Like pawns.
Yeah, cheap labor, basically. And the issues that arise that are a little bit different in that case, and again, a lot more will come out in the trial, was that at some point they were having trouble paying the workers. Now the farms had paid the money to Global Horizons. Global Horizons was required to pay the workers. And many times they didn't meet their deadlines on payroll. We were told, keep working, we're going to pay you. Weeks would go by, they wouldn't get paid. The farms would get upset, the workers would get upset, and that became a consistent problem. My only guess is that they started having financial issues because that doesn't happen if the company is stable and they're paying the workers on time. And so I think there's different aspects in that case. Again, it's a much larger case because it does go across state lines. The scheme was much larger and it went on for longer. So
what is the there's a criminal case against Global now that you're talking about that's going to go to trial. So what are the elements of the criminal case? What's the basis of the criminal case in the global case, basically?
Well, basically it's forced labor is the biggest charge that's been lodged. And forced labor is in our federal regulations, and that deals with a situation where someone is coerced either through economic or physical means to force their labor to continue working, either for pay or for not pay. And so that's the largest charge. There's also document servitude, which was also lodged in the Loon Farms case, where passports were taken for the purpose of control. And however the company wants to say, well, we had to take them to get their visas. However, it was for the purpose of control, because often the men had to move, were given their passports to get on the airplane. As soon as they got off the airplane, when they were transported, the passports were taken again. So, in a way to allow these men very little contact with the outside world, not give them an opportunity to seek help because they had no identification, these men were lost.
And a lot of them didn't speak English, they were poorly educated, and so on, right?
Correct.
Yeah, most of them spoke no English at all when they came. Right.
Yeah, and they were married, right? They were all required to be married, is that
Yes.
right?
You know, under the recruiters, again, it has to do with the control issue. And Claire and I were just talking about this the other day with somebody else, talking about, you know, the reasons that the marriage were. One was the embassy would be more likely to issue a visa if someone is married because there's ties back to the home country. And secondly, it's a matter of control, to control the family and say, you know, if the family is involved, then financially, if they have a financial stake in this person, that person is going to do whatever they can to keep the stability of the family intact. Right. And that was the exact situation. That's why it worked so effectively for years before these men were able to get help, because they kept quiet. They were scared.
And oftentimes the deeds to the land that were put up were not just the immediate family of the men, but they were the land of the in-laws as well. So
you're talking about a huge impact on
Yes.
not just the couple,
Communities,
but
whole
whole
communities.
communities, right?
Right.
The
And
extended families and
so
so
the
on.
stress that's going to put on the men for them to just keep working and shut up. It was a very powerful tool. And again, you know, there are when you talk about human trafficking and modern day slavery, there are different ways of keeping people trapped. And it's much easier to think of kind of maybe a sweatshop worker who's in a basement tied to a sewing machine, and that can be one form of modern day slavery and human trafficking. But there are other more subtle coercive ways of getting people in that situation. And one thing Melissa and I have asked so many of our clients, if you had known what the situation was going to be when you got here, would you ever have paid that amount of recruitment fee? And they laugh. They say, absolutely not. We're not highly educated, but we're not stupid. Right. And so, you know, it really comes down to what they were promised and what was delivered, and how much these guys have lost in the process.
One of the things that really bothered me during the first couple of days of that criminal trial was that the defense painting the portrait for the jury, trying to connect with the jury and talking about, this is like taking a mortgage on your house. And you would pay your mortgage if you could, right? You wouldn't, you know, and look, we have this huge mortgage fraud in the United States. And it really bothered me that that was equated to the situation, because no one is forcing people to go out and work or be homeless. You take a mortgage if you can afford it or not, if you have a job. Mm-hmm. And so insinuating that these men did it for pure profit was actually really disgusting to me. It really bothered me a lot.
It was kind of the reverse effect for them. And in the global case, we're almost out of time, but in the global case, just to sum it up, there's actually 8 defendants, 3 have already pled guilty, and then the trials begin in February 2012. So it should be very interesting.
It should be interesting. And the EEOC also has a case against Global Horizons, and that's going to be in court before Judge Ezra tomorrow. So
great. So we'll see a lot going on. And we've had Madi Oriad on the show and let him have his say as well.
It was an interesting interview.
We try to get all sides here.
That's right.
And you do.
Well, thank you for coming on the show and giving us your perspective. And we'll have to have another show as this cases move along. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your work, Malia.
This has been News Behind the News. Thank you for joining us. Aloha.